Billionaire father forced his son to marry a homeless woman with twin daughters to humiliate him. But on the wedding day, everyone was in shock when the twins called him Daddy at the altar. The glass and steel tower rose imposingly against the grey city sky. On the top floor, Martin Cole stood motionless, hands in the pockets of his tailored suit, eyes fixed on the window. Down below, the world seemed too small for someone like him. Martin wasn't just wealthy. He was one of the most powerful men in the country. He had built his empire with calculated coldness, never letting emotions interfere with his decisions. His face, marked by deep expression lines, rarely showed any feeling. It was then that his gaze caught something that stood out from the urban landscape. A young woman sitting on the sidewalk across from the building. She didn't look older than 30. Cuddled up against her were two little girls, identical twins with dark hair and perfect curls. They must have been about 4 years old. Pathetic, he initially thought. But something about that scene made him keep watching. The woman, despite her precarious situation, maintained a silent dignity. The little ones were laughing, in spite of everything. There was a strength there that Martin recognized, even if he wouldn't admit it. His phone rang. "Mr. Cole, your son has just arrived." Martin sighed. Sighs sent him up. While waiting, he looked back at the family on the sidewalk. A thought began to form in his mind. It wasn't compassion. Martin Cole didn't know that word. It was something more calculated, colder, an opportunity. The door burst open. Damien Cole walked in without knocking, as he always did. At 27, he was the perfect picture of privilege. Designer clothes, a $100,000 watch on his wrist, perfectly styled hair, and that smile of someone who had never heard the word no. "Am I late for dinner? I was with the guys at the club and—" "Punctuality is the least I expect from you." Martin cut him off, it says, without turning around. "We'll have dinner now." The penthouse dining room was absurdly large for just 2 people. The solid oak table could easily seat 20 guests, but only 2 places were set at opposite ends. It had been this way for years, ever since Damien's mother had passed away. For 20 minutes they ate in silence. The only sounds were the clinking of silver cutlery and the occasional sip of wine. Martin watched his son, who was constantly checking his phone, completely uninterested in his father's presence. "Do you know how much this wine costs?" Martin asked suddenly. Damien shrugged. "A few thousand, I imagine. $5,000 a bottle. And you're drinking it like it's water. So what? It's not like we're going to go broke because of it." Damien laughed, pouring himself another glass. Martin wiped his lips with the linen napkin and finally looked up, staring directly at his son. "You're getting married." Damien choked on his wine. "So what? You're going to marry a woman who lives on the street," Martin continued, with the same calmness as someone commenting on the weather. "You will learn the value of the things you've always despised." Damien's laugh echoed through the hall. It was a nervous, disbelieving laugh. "That's a good one, Dad. What's the real reason for this dinner? Want to give me another lecture on responsibility, or is this about that incident on Peterson's yacht?" Martin remained unfazed. "This isn't a joke, nor a threat. It's a fact. The wedding is already set for 2 weeks from now." Damien's smile slowly faded as he realized his father showed no sign of joking. "This is ridiculous. You can't force me to marry anyone." "I can and I will. Unless you want to renounce your trust fund, your shares in the company, your apartment, your cars, everything you have, Damien, was given to you by me, and it can be taken away just as easily." "This is blackmail." Damien slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses tremble. "Call it what you want. But on the 15th, you will be at the altar, and you will only meet your bride at the ceremony." Damien turned pale. Who is she?" "That doesn't matter now. What matters is that you will finally learn to live in the real world, the world that exists beyond your parties, sports cars, and limitless credit cards." "You're insane," Damien whispered, in disbelief. "Perhaps, but I'm also determined." That night, Damien didn't sleep. He paced back and forth in his penthouse apartment, trying to understand if his father was serious. Martin Cole was known for being ruthless in business, but he had never interfered in his personal life like this. The next morning, Damien stormed into his father's office. "This isn't happening," he announced, slapping his hands on Martin's desk. The old man just stared at him with those cold eyes. "The invitations have already been sent. Your presence is mandatory." In the days that followed, Damien used every resource at his disposal. He hired the best private investigators in the city to find out who the mysterious bride was. He threatened longtime family employees, offered astronomical bribes. He consulted 3 different lawyers about the possibility of challenging his father's decision. Nothing worked. The investigators came back empty-handed. The employees seemed more loyal to Martin than to the money offered. And the lawyers were clear. Legally, Martin could dispose of his fortune as he saw fit. A week before the wedding, Damien tried to run away. He made it to the private airport with plans to disappear on some remote island. He found the family jet grounded, with essential parts removed under Martin's orders. With 3 days left, he tried a different approach. He invited his father to lunch and, for the first time in his life, tried to be humble. "Dad, be reasonable. I can change. I can work more, spend less, do volunteer work. Anything but this." Martin just shook his head. "Too late, Damien. Some lessons are only learned the hard way." On the eve of the wedding, Damien gave in to drinking. He woke up on the fateful day with a terrible hangover and a sense of absolute defeat. When the driver arrived to pick him up, Damien was sitting on the edge of his bed, staring at the wedding suit that had been delivered without his knowledge. A restlessness grew in his chest. It wasn't just anger or frustration, it was fear. For the first time in his privileged life, Damien Cole had no control over what would happen next. The clock read 10 in the morning. In 2 hours, he would be at the altar, waiting for a bride he didn't know, a woman from the streets, as his father had said. And worst of all, there was nothing more he could do to stop it. The day dawned clear, without a single cloud in the sky, an irony that didn't escape Damien as the limousine glided through the city streets. Through the tinted window, he saw ordinary people living their simple lives. For the first time, he felt a pang of envy for those anonymous existences. St. Patrick's Cathedral loomed majestically on the corner, a historic building of stone and stained glass that the Cole family had sponsored for generations. Damien swallowed hard as the vehicle stopped. "Mr. Cole, we've arrived," the driver announced, opening the door. Damien didn't move. "Mr. Cole," the man insisted, "your father is already waiting." Resigned, Damien got out of the car. At the top of the stairs, Martin was chatting with the priest as if it were a perfectly normal day. When he saw his son, he just nodded briefly. "The groom has arrived," Martin remarked to the clergyman. "We can begin." "You still haven't told me who she is," Damien muttered through clenched teeth as they entered. Martin smiled faintly. "You'll find out soon enough." The inside of the cathedral was breathtaking. Despite the short notice, it seemed that the Coles' entire social circle was present. Bankers, politicians, celebrities, business partners, all looking at Damien with expressions that ranged from curiosity to poorly disguised pity. 300 guests, Martin informed him, as if talking about the weather. "I wanted to make sure everyone saw this moment." Damien felt his stomach sink. It wasn't enough to be humiliated by a forced marriage. His father was making a public spectacle of it. The organ began to play the wedding march, slower and more solemn than Damien remembered. He was led to the altar almost automatically, his legs moving on pure reflex. The priest smiled kindly at him, but Damien couldn't return it. "Who is she?" he tried again, in a desperate whisper to his father, who now stood beside him as his best man. "Patience," was the only reply. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Damien felt sweat dripping down his back, staining his expensive shirt. His eyes nervously scanned the faces in the church, trying to guess who his bride might be. Was she already there, among the guests, or was she someone so unknown that she wasn't even present? Suddenly, the cathedral doors opened. The music shifted to something softer. Damien held his breath. But it wasn't the bride. It was 2 little girls, identical twins in light blue dresses with dark hair and perfect curls. Damien recognized them immediately. They were the children he had seen with the woman on the sidewalk days ago. They held small baskets of petals, which they scattered down the aisle with childish enthusiasm. A murmur went through the crowd. Damien felt his heart race. Something was very wrong. The girls walked up to him with innocent smiles. They stopped right in front of him, looked up with big, dark eyes, and then, in perfect sync, they said, "Daddy." The word hit Damien like a lightning bolt. He felt the floor disappear from under his feet. He looked at his father, searching for an explanation, but Martin just watched the scene with attentive eyes. I never, Damien stammered, unable to form coherent sentences. Before he could recover from the shock, the music grew louder. The doors opened again, and there she was. The bride wore a simple dress, without the excesses Damien would expect from a Cole wedding. Her veil covered her face, but through the thin fabric, he could see delicate contours. She walked alone, with no one to give her away. The entire cathedral fell into absolute silence. It was as if everyone held their breath at the same time. When the woman reached the altar, Damien tried to see her face through the veil. He couldn't. His hands were shaking so much he was afraid he would drop her when the priest indicated he should lift the veil. With clumsy fingers, Damien lifted the delicate fabric, and it was then that he saw her for the first time. Deep green eyes stared back at him without fear, without shame, without anger. Her face was harmonious, with delicate features that suggested both strength and gentleness. It wasn't the manufactured beauty of the women he usually dated. It was something more natural, more real, and completely unknown to him. Damien had never seen her before in his life. "Eleanor," she said softly, introducing herself. He opened his mouth to reply, but the priest was already beginning the ceremony. "We are gathered here today." Damien barely heard the words. His mind was spinning in frantic circles. The girls had called him father. This woman, Eleanor, was supposedly his wife, and he didn't know any of them. In holy matrimony. The guests watched with expressions ranging from shock to amusement. Some whispered among themselves. Others discreetly took photos with their phones. Damien looked at his father, who maintained an impassive face. Martin's eyes said it all. There was no escape. "Damien Cole, do you take Eleanor Winters to be your lawful wife, to love and to cherish, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" A heavy silence fell over the cathedral. All eyes turned to him. Damien felt his throat go dry. The words were stuck. He looked at Eleanor, who was staring at him with a disconcerting serenity. He looked at the girls, who were smiling innocently. He looked at his father, whose expression left no doubt about the consequences of a refusal. "I do," he finally answered, his voice barely a whisper. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Damien repeated words without registering them. He moved like an automaton. When the time for the rings came, his hands trembled so much he almost dropped the ring. Eleanor's fingers were slender, delicate. His were clumsy and sweaty. She showed no disgust or impatience. She just helped him subtly, guiding his hand to complete the gesture. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest announced. "You may kiss the bride." Another moment of panic. Damien leaned in stiffly, placing the briefest, most superficial kiss possible on Eleanor's lips. Even so, he felt an unexpected warmth from that minimal contact. The applause sounded fake to his ears. Flashes went off from all sides. The twins ran to hug Eleanor's legs, looking up at Damien with innocent smiles. The reception that followed was an exercise in torture. Damien smiled mechanically at hundreds of people who congratulated him with empty words. Eleanor remained by his side, politely answering the most invasive questions. The girls played among the guests, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding. Martin circulated among the groups, the perfect host. From time to time, he glanced at his son, checking if he was still following the script. When the last guests finally left, Damien felt his whole body ache with tension. Eleanor sat in a nearby chair, the twins asleep in her lap. Martin approached with slow, measured steps. He took something from his pocket and held it out to his son. A key. Simple, common, made of cheap metal. "This is your new home," Martin said, with the same calm voice he would use to discuss the weather. "You'll have to learn everything on your own." "What are you talking about?" Damien asked, not taking the key. "Your new life starts today," Martin replied. "There will be no credit cards, no bank account, no penthouse apartment. Just this key, your new family, and the lessons you need to learn." "You can't be serious," Damien stammered. "I've never been more serious in my life." Martin turned to Eleanor, who was watching the scene in silence. "The car is waiting. It knows the address." And without another word, Martin Cole turned his back and left, leaving Damien, Eleanor, and the two sleeping girls alone in the enormous, empty hall. The driver drove in silence through the illuminated avenues of downtown, then through progressively narrower and darker streets. The luxury car looked more and more out of place with the surrounding scenery. Elegant buildings gave way to modest constructions, then to cramped houses, until they finally entered a neighborhood Damien would never imagine visiting voluntarily. "There must be some mistake," he muttered, as the vehicle stopped in front of a small house, squeezed between similar ones on a narrow street. 47. Oak Street, the driver confirmed, checking the address. "Mr. Cole's instructions were to drop you here." The man got out of the car and opened the trunk, taking out two worn-out suitcases that Damien had never seen before. Beside him, Eleanor held the sleeping twins, one in each arm, with a skill that surprised him. "Let's go inside," she said simply. "The girls need to sleep in a real bed." Damien stood on the sidewalk, looking at the two-story building in disbelief. The beige paint was peeling in several places. The small porch had a broken step. One of the upstairs windows was covered with a piece of plastic instead of glass. "This isn't a joke," he said, more to himself than to Eleanor. She was already at the door, trying to balance the children while fumbling with the key in the rusty lock. Damien remained motionless until the driver cleared his throat. "Sir, I have orders to leave as soon as you are inside." Reluctantly, Damien walked up the porch steps. The wood creaked under his Italian shoes. He took the key from Eleanor's hands and, after a few frustrated attempts, managed to open the door. The smell was the first thing that hit him, a mix of must and old wood and something indefinable. It wasn't exactly unpleasant, but it was a far cry from the scent of expensive air fresheners in his apartment. Eleanor went in first, carrying the twins. Damien hesitated on the threshold, looking back just in time to see the luxury car driving away, taking with it his last link to his previous life. The living room was small and sparsely furnished. A worn-out sofa with a patched-up upholstery occupied the main wall. An armchair that didn't match anything was in the corner. A coffee table with cup rings completed the scene, along with an old television that seemed to work by a miracle. "I'm going to put the girls to bed," Eleanor informed him, climbing a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. Damien was left alone, standing in the middle of the room, not knowing what to do or where to go. He dropped the suitcases on the floor and began to explore the ground floor. The kitchen was cramped, with cabinets that had seen better days. The refrigerator hummed loudly, as if it were making a huge effort to function. He opened it and found only a few basic items: milk, eggs, butter, some fruit. The downstairs bathroom was tiny, with cracked tiles and a persistently dripping faucet. Damien looked at his reflection in the stained mirror and barely recognized himself. He was still wearing his wedding suit, now wrinkled. His face was pale, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. "How is this possible?" he muttered to his reflection. Eleanor's voice startled him. "The girls are asleep. I'll show you our room." "Our room." The words landed like stones in Damien's stomach. "Where are my things?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "In the suitcases. Your father sent some basic clothes. The rest? Well, he said you wouldn't need it anymore." Damien followed Eleanor up the stairs, each creaking step announcing his social downfall. The upstairs hallway was narrow, with 3 doors. "This is the girls' room," Eleanor indicated the first door, which was ajar. In the dim light, Damien could see the 2 small forms asleep in a single bed, sharing the space as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "This is the bathroom," she continued, pointing to the middle door. "And this," she opened the last door, "is our room." The room was small, mostly occupied by a simple double bed with a mattress that was visibly sagging in the middle. A wardrobe with a warped door was pushed against the wall. A small dresser with 3 drawers completed the furniture. "You can use these drawers," Eleanor indicated. "I'm going to take a quick shower before bed." When she left, Damien closed the door and leaned against it, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. The reality of the situation finally hit him with full force. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a bad joke. It was his new life. He felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. It was his last connection to the real world. He grabbed it anxiously, seeing dozens of notifications, messages from friends about the bizarre wedding, news stories about the surprising turn in the life of playboy Damian Cole. He opened his banking app. All his accounts were frozen, credit cards inactive. A message from his father appeared on the screen. "I hope you're settling in well. You have 3 months to prove you can live like a responsible man. During this period, you will have to work and support your family like anyone else. At the end, we'll see if you've learned your lesson." Damian felt a fury rise within him. He threw the phone on the bed and started pacing in the cramped space. He wanted to scream, to break things, to run away from that place. Instead, he grabbed his suitcase and opened it violently. As Eleanor had said, it contained only basic clothes, nothing that came close to his usual wardrobe. Plain jeans, simple t-shirts, cheap underwear. Not even his personal grooming products were there. He heard the bathroom door open and close. Eleanor would be back in the room any moment. Without a second thought, Damian locked the door, threw himself on the bed and pretended to be asleep. When Eleanor knocked lightly, he didn't answer. He heard her sigh on the other side of the door. "Good night, Damian," she said, before her footsteps moved away down the hall. Alone in the strange room, Damian finally allowed tears to escape. He hadn't cried since he was 8, when his father had forbidden him from showing weakness. Now he sobbed silently, a mixture of anger, shame, and fear of the unknown. At some point during the night, exhaustion won. He fell asleep still dressed, dreaming of his old life, which now seemed to have happened to someone else. The noise woke him up. Strange sounds, childish voices, laughter. Damian opened his eyes, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then reality came back like a punch. Daylight streamed through the cracks in the cheap curtain. His phone showed 7:45 a.m. Normally, he would be sleeping until at least noon. He got up, his body aching from sleeping in a contorted position. He reluctantly changed his clothes, putting on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt from the suitcase. The clothes were of average quality, nothing compared to what he was used to, but not as bad as he had feared. He hesitated at the door. Part of him wanted to stay locked in there forever, but hunger and curiosity pushed him out. He turned the knob and stepped out. The smell of coffee filled his nostrils. He followed the aroma to the kitchen, where he found Eleanor making breakfast. The twins were sitting at the small table, eating colorful cereal. When they saw him, the girls smiled. "Daddy's awake," one of them said. "So good morning," Eleanor greeted him, not seeming bothered by the fact that he had locked himself in the room the night before. "Want some coffee?" Damian nodded, uncomfortable. He sat in the only empty chair, feeling too big for the flimsy furniture. "What are your name?" he asked the girls, realizing he still didn't know them. "I'm Lily," said the one on the left. "I'm Lucy," completed the one on the right. They were so identical that Damian doubted he could ever tell them apart. Both had their mother's green eyes and dark, curly hair. "Damian," he introduced himself formally, extending his hand as if he were in a business meeting. The girls laughed, amused by the gesture. "We know your name, Daddy," said Lily. Or was it Lucy? "You know I'm not really your father, right?" Damian asked, unsure how to handle the situation. Eleanor turned from the sink, her gaze suddenly serious. "Can we talk about this later?" The girls seemed oblivious to the tension, continuing to eat cheerfully. Eleanor placed a cup of coffee in front of Damian and sat down next to her daughters. "So do you have school today?" Damian asked, trying to sound casual. "It's Saturday," answered Lucy or Lily. "There's no school on Saturday, Daddy." "Of course," he muttered, embarrassed for not even knowing what day of the week it was. After breakfast, the girls ran to play in the small living room. Eleanor started washing the dishes. Damian sat there, watching. "Aren't you going to explain what's going on?" he finally asked. Eleanor dried her hands on the worn dish towel before answering. "Your father approached me 3 weeks ago. He said he wanted to teach his son a lesson. He offered a deal." What kind of deal? He would help me and the girls get off the street. In return, I would marry you and participate in this experiment? And you just accepted, just like that. Eleanor looked at him firmly. Have you ever spent a night on the street, Damien? Have you ever had to choose between buying medicine for your daughters or food for dinner? He looked away, ashamed. Your father said it would be temporary. A few months, until you learned the value of things. For me and the girls, it's a chance to start over. Even if it all ends later, we will have had a roof over our heads and food on the table. Eleanor's practical coldness surprised him. There was no sentimentality in her words, just harsh reality. I'm going out, Damien announced, standing up abruptly. I need to talk to some people. Eleanor didn't try to stop him. Thanks to the spare keys hanging by the door, Damien went out into the street, taking a deep breath of the morning air. The neighborhood was even more depressing in the daylight. Small, cramped houses, old cars parked along the street, simple people starting their day. He took out his phone and started calling his friends. One after another, they all seemed suddenly too busy to help him. Some didn't even answer. Others listened to his unbelievable story and hung up with empty promises to call back later. After 2 hours of wandering aimlessly and dozens of frustrating calls, Damien returned to the house. He was exhausted, as if he had run a marathon. Eleanor was in the kitchen, preparing lunch. The girls were drawing at the living room table. Did you get any help? She asked, with no irony in her voice. No, he admitted, defeated. No one wanted to get involved. Your father is a powerful man, and you never cultivated true friendships. The observation hurt because it was true. Damien had always treated people as disposable, useful only as long as they could offer something. What are we going to do now? He asked, feeling lost. Live, like everyone else. Eleanor went back to chopping vegetables for lunch. The simple, practical gesture made him feel useless. Can I help? He offered, more out of not knowing what to do with himself than any real desire. She seemed genuinely surprised. Sure, you can heat up the milk for the girls, hot chocolate. Damien had never heated milk in his life. He always had staff for that. He watched Eleanor put the liquid in the small pot and turned on the stove, mimicking her movements. You need to stir it so it doesn't form a skin, she explained. He picked up the spoon, but his movement was clumsy. The pot slipped, spilling hot milk on the stove and the floor. Damn it, he exclaimed, frustrated. It's okay, Eleanor said calmly, grabbing a cloth. Everyone makes mistakes when they're learning. The natural way she handled the accident made him feel even worse. It was as if she was used to taking care of a third child, not a husband. After the simple but surprisingly tasty lunch, Damien tried to help clean up the kitchen. His hands, accustomed to touching only expensive and delicate objects, felt large and clumsy. The girls were watching cartoons on the old television. Eleanor was washing the dishes. Damien felt out of place, a stranger invading the established routine of this small family. He decided to explore the house more. As he walked down the narrow hallway, he tripped on something. 2 small, colorful shoes were scattered on the floor. He almost fell, catching himself on the wall at the last moment. Watch out for the girls' shoes, Eleanor warned from the kitchen. They always leave them scattered about. Damien felt a wave of frustration. In his apartment, everything had its proper place. There were never unexpected obstacles, never unpleasant surprises. Every object was carefully positioned by his cleaning staff. Here, the children's shoes were left wherever they took them off. The dishes waited to be washed. Dust collected in the corners. Life happened without filters, without intermediaries. He sat on the bottom step of the stairs, observing the small world around him. The girls absorbed in their cartoon, Eleanor efficiently finishing cleaning the kitchen, the sun streaming through the cracked window, illuminating dust particles in the air. A thought struck him with frightening clarity. For the first time in his life, he controlled absolutely nothing. He had no money to buy solutions. He had no status to demand privileges. He had no power to bend reality to his will. He was just an ordinary man in a simple house, trying not to trip over the shoes of children who called him daddy. And that terrified him more than anything he had ever faced. 3 days had passed since their arrival at the house. Damien managed to avoid Eleanor and the twins most of the time, leaving early and coming back late, wandering aimlessly through the city. The money he had in his pocket, a few crumpled bills from the wedding day, ran out quickly. He couldn't go on like this. On the morning of the fourth day, his cell phone rang. His father's name flashed on the screen. Damien hesitated, but answered. "How are you adapting to real life?" Martin asked, without any introduction. "You know perfectly well how I am," Damien answered through gritted teeth. "No money, stuck in a house that feels more like a shoebox, with people I barely know." "Exactly as planned." Martin's voice sounded satisfied. "I imagine you're in need of money." Damien swallowed his pride. "Yes, then come to my office today at 2. I have a proposal for you." The call ended before Damien could reply. He stared at the phone, torn between anger and relief. Maybe his father had finally grown tired of this cruel game. "Who was that?" Eleanor asked, entering the kitchen. She wore simple, clean clothes. Her hair was tied back in a practical ponytail. "My father. He wants to see me today." A glimmer of hope appeared in Damien's eyes. Maybe he's realized this whole situation is ridiculous. Eleanor just nodded, without commenting. She prepared a cup of coffee and offered it to him. "The girls asked for you last night," she said casually. "They wanted to know if you would read them a story." Damien felt a pang of guilt he didn't expect. I was busy." "I understand," Eleanor replied, with no judgment in her voice. "They'll understand too." At 2 o'clock sharp, Damien entered the imposing building that housed the Cole Group headquarters. The security guard at the reception, who had always greeted him with deference, now looked at him with poorly disguised curiosity. "I have a meeting with Martin Cole," he announced, trying to maintain his dignity. "Your name, please?" the man asked, as if he didn't know him. "Damien Cole," he replied, annoyed. "I'm his son." The guard checked a list. "Ah, yes, Mr. Cole left instructions to send you to the 30th floor." Damien knew that path well. How many times had he gone up to his father's office to ask for more money or explain some scandal that had appeared in the tabloids? The difference was that now he felt like a stranger. In the elevator, he noticed the glances of the other employees. Some looked away, others whispered. His wedding was certainly the favorite topic in the company's hallways. Martin was waiting for him, seated behind his imposing mahogany desk. He didn't stand up when Damien entered. "Punctual," he observed. "A positive change." "Let's get straight to the point," Damien replied, sitting down uninvited. "How much longer is this punishment going to last?" Martin clasped his hands on the desk. "It's not a punishment, it's a lesson, and it will last as long as it takes for you to learn it. And in the meantime, am I supposed to live on air?" "No, you'll live off your work like most people." Damien felt his stomach sink. "What work?" "I have a position for you here at the company." For a moment, Damien felt immense relief. Finally, something familiar. Maybe an executive role, something he could do sitting in an air-conditioned office. "In the stockroom," Martin completed. The silence that followed was absolute. Damien looked at his father, expecting it to be a joke. "So you can't be serious?" "I'm perfectly serious. It's the only option I'm offering. I have a business degree, I have an MBA, I'm the heir to this company." Martin remained impassive. "And now you will learn how it really works, starting from the bottom. The pay is minimum wage. The hours are 8 to 5 DE, Monday through Friday." Damien stood up, furious. "This is humiliating. You want me to carry boxes like some common laborer?" "Exactly. Take it or leave it." "And if I leave it?" Martin gave a faint smile. "Then you'll have to find another job on your own. Good luck explaining your professional history, or lack thereof, in interviews." Cornered, Damien felt his anger give way to desperation. He needed money. Eleanor and the girls depended on him now, even if he hadn't asked for this responsibility. "When do I start?" he asked, defeated. "Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Go to HR first to sign the paperwork, and Damien..." Martin paused. "Dress appropriately. There's no place for Italian suits in the stockroom." The next morning, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, Damien reported to the Human Resources Department. The employee who assisted him could barely hide her embarrassment. "Mr. Cole, Mr. Damien, here are your documents." He signed mechanically, feeling as if he were signing his own sentence. Your supervisor is Mr. Roberts. He's waiting for you in the basement." The stockroom was located 3 levels below the ground floor, a place Damien didn't even know existed, despite having spent his entire life in and out of that building. Roberts was a burly man in his 50s with calloused hands. His gaze assessed Damien from head to toe. "So you're the boss's kid," he said bluntly. "Let me make one thing clear. Down here, that means nothing. You work like everyone else, or you get out. Understood?" Damien nodded, swallowing the snarky reply he would normally have given. "Today, you're going to learn the cataloging system. Then you'll help unload the truck that arrives at 10. The first few hours were monotonous but bearable. Roberts explained the system of labels, shelves, and inventory control. Damien tried to pay attention, but his mind wandered. It was surreal to be there, learning to manage toilet paper and office supplies when he should have been in strategic meetings. At 10, the real work began. A truck arrived with dozens of boxes, some small and others huge. "These go to the 2nd floor, Roberts indicated, pointing to a pile. "Those to the 5th floor stock. The rest stays here." For the first time in his life, Damien felt the real weight of physical labor. His hands, accustomed only to holding golf clubs and whiskey glasses, soon began to burn. His back, which had never bent for anything heavier than a suitcase, carried by an assistant, protested with every move. At lunchtime, everyone headed to the employee cafeteria, another place Damien was completely unaware of. The food was simple, served on plastic trays, nothing like the Michelin-starred restaurants where he used to have lunch. He sat alone, watching the other employees. They talked, laughed, complained about their bosses. They had a camaraderie that seemed genuine. No one approached him. In the afternoon, the work continued. More boxes, more labels, more shelves. Roberts gave him no slack, pointing out mistakes and demanding perfection. "This isn't a hobby, kid," he said when Damien asked for a break. "We have targets to meet." At 5, when he was finally able to leave, Damien could barely walk. Every muscle in his body ached. Hands that had once only known the touch of silk were now red and starting to blister. The journey home seemed endless. On the bus, another novelty in his life, Damien closed his eyes, exhausted. When he got off, he still had to walk 5 blocks. He arrived home dragging his feet. Eleanor was in the kitchen, making dinner. The twins were playing in the living room. "Daddy!" they shouted when they saw him. They ran to hug him, but Damien was so tired he could barely manage a smile. "How was work?" Eleanor asked, noticing his condition. "Terrible," he answered honestly. "I never imagined it could be so exhausting." She nodded, understanding. "The first day is always the worst. It'll get better." "I highly doubt that," he muttered, collapsing onto the sofa. Dinner was served, but Damien could hardly lift his fork. The twins chatted excitedly about their day, but he only caught stray words. His mind was numb with fatigue. "You should take a hot shower," Eleanor suggested when she noticed he was almost falling asleep at the table. "It helps with the muscle aches." Damien nodded, grateful for the suggestion. The shower helped a little, but when he finally lay down, he knew he would be even worse the next morning. The second day was no better, nor the third. Every morning, Damien woke up with his body protesting, dragged himself to work, endured Robert's orders and the weight of the boxes, and returned home destroyed. At the end of the first week, he received his first paycheck. The amount was so low he almost laughed. It was less than what he used to spend on a single night out. "How do people live on this?" he asked Eleanor, looking at the numbers. "With difficulty," she answered realistically, "but they live." On Sunday, his only day off, Damien didn't get out of bed until noon. When he finally got up, he realized the house was quiet. "Eleanor, girls?" he called out. No one answered. On the kitchen table, he found a note. "We went to the park. There's food in the fridge. We'll be back this afternoon." Alone for the first time in days, Damien looked around. The small house that had at first seemed like a nightmare now, strangely, offered a comfort his luxurious apartment never had. It was a lived-in, not imperfect, but real place. He sat on the worn sofa, letting the exhaustion of the week wash over him. It wasn't just physical tiredness, it was a weariness of the soul. In just 1 week, his entire worldview had been turned upside down. And the worst part, he knew that on Monday it would all start over again. 2 weeks had passed since Damien started working in the stockroom. His muscles still ached at the end of the day, but it was no longer the paralyzing pain from the beginning. His body, once shaped only by light sessions at a private gym, was now adapting to the hard labor. It was Saturday morning. For the first time, Damien woke up before the girls. The silence of the house had a comforting quality. He made coffee following the steps he had watched Eleanor take so many times. The result was a brew that was too strong, but at least he hadn't spilled anything. Through the kitchen window, he saw the small backyard. Dry leaves had accumulated in the corners. The grass grew unevenly. In his apartment, he never had to worry about this kind of thing. Now he felt a strange unease seeing the mess. In the cabinet under the sink, he found an old broom. Without much thought, he went out to the yard and started sweeping. It seemed simple. Push the leaves in one direction, gather them into piles, collect them. But the light breeze scattered the leaves as soon as he tried to group them. The broom, with its worn bristles, scraped unevenly against the ground. "Not as easy as it looks, is it?" Eleanor's voice surprised him. She was standing at the back door, a cup of coffee in her hands. "I'm managing," he replied, trying to sound confident as he struggled with a particularly stubborn pile of leaves. "If you sweep against the wind, it's easier," she suggested, with no hint of mockery. Damien tried to follow her advice. It worked better, but it was still a frustrating job. After 20 minutes, the yard was only marginally cleaner than before. His hands, already calloused from work in the stockroom, now had a new blister at the base of his thumb. "At least you tried," Eleanor said when he finally gave up. There was no criticism in her voice, just a statement of fact. The twins woke up shortly after. Seeing Damien sweaty and holding the broom, they looked at him with curiosity. "Are you cleaning the yard, Daddy?" asked Lucy, the one with a small mole near her eye, the only detail he had discovered to tell them apart. "Trying to," he admitted. "We can help," offered Lily, excitedly. Before he could answer, the two had already run inside and returned with small toy brooms. The result of their combined efforts was more chaotic than efficient, but somehow, Damien felt satisfied in the end. On Sunday, Eleanor announced they needed to go grocery shopping. "The supermarket is 4 blocks away," she explained. "I usually go alone, but if you want to help?" "Of course," Damien replied, wanting to show he wasn't completely useless. The supermarket was small and simple, nothing like the gourmet shops he used to frequent. Eleanor moved efficiently through the aisles, comparing prices, choosing items carefully. Damien followed her, pushing the cart where the twins were seated, one on each side. "Can we get cookies, Daddy?" Lily asked, pointing to a colorful shelf. "Ask your mum," he replied automatically, surprised at himself for acting like a father. Eleanor allowed only one package, explaining that they needed to save money. Damien, used to buying anything he desired, watched in fascination as she mentally calculated every expense, prioritizing the essentials. In the checkout line, the girls got restless. To distract them, Damien started making discreet, funny faces. Soon, the two were giggling, trying to imitate his expressions. A man in the next line smiled, nodding in paternal solidarity. Damien felt something strange in his chest, a silent acknowledgement that he was part of a club he never imagined he would belong to. On the way back, Eleanor divided the bags between them. Damien took the heaviest ones, feeling strangely proud to be able to help with his newfound strength. Halfway home, one of the bags tore. Cans of food rolled onto the sidewalk. Eggs broke on the ground. "Damn it!" he exclaimed, his face burning with embarrassment. Eleanor showed no irritation. "It happens," she said simply, helping to pick up what they could salvage. The twins watched, worried about his reaction. Damien took a deep breath, controlling his frustration. In another time, he would have exploded, blamed someone, demanded compensation. Now, he just accepted the small disaster and moved on. Back at home, he offered to put the groceries away. It seemed like a simple task, but he soon realized he had no idea where anything went. He put the canned goods on the wrong shelf, stored onions in the refrigerator, and left the bread in the wrong place. "You've never put away groceries before, have you?" Eleanor asked, discreetly rearranging the items he had chaotically distributed. "We had staff for that," he admitted, feeling ridiculously privileged as he said the words. She smiled slightly. "Well, it's never too late to learn." In the following weeks, Damien began to notice small changes in himself. He no longer got so lost in the kitchen. He could fold clothes in an acceptable manner. He learned that onions didn't go in the fridge and that sugar was kept in the cabinet near the stove. At work, Roberts was still demanding, but he no longer treated him like a complete incompetent. The other employees started talking to him during lunch, especially after he stopped mentioning his last name or his previous life. At home, the twins seemed more and more comfortable with his presence. One afternoon, coming home from work, he found them waiting at the gate. "Daddy, look what we found!" exclaimed Lucy, holding out a makeshift bouquet of dandelions and other wildflowers picked from a nearby flower bed. "They're beautiful," he replied, accepting the gift seriously, as if they were imported roses. "We picked them especially for you," added Lily, her eyes shining with pride. That night, the wildflowers adorned a glass of water on his bedside table. Damien looked at them for a long time before falling asleep. No one had ever given him flowers before. He was usually the one sending expensive arrangements to impress some fleeting conquest. As the days went by, the girls began to ask questions about his work. "Do you carry very heavy boxes, Daddy?" Lily asked during dinner. "Some," he replied, surprised by their genuine interest. "And do you have friends there?" Lucy wanted to know. Damien thought of the stockroom employees. They weren't friends, exactly, but they were no longer strangers. "I'm getting to know some people," he said honestly. The questions continued, night after night. What was his boss like? What was inside the boxes? Did he use a machine to lift the heavy things? Damien found himself answering with increasing patience, even making up little stories to entertain the children. Eleanor observed these interactions in silence, sometimes with a faint smile on her lips. On one of those nights, when the girls had finally gone to sleep, she commented, "You're different." "How so?" "More present." "In the beginning, it seemed like only your body was here." Damien didn't know what to reply. She was right, of course. In the first few weeks, he had been living on autopilot, waiting to wake up from this nightmare, or for his father to finally give in. Now somehow he was really there, living each day, answering questions about boxes and making funny faces to make two little girls laugh. On a particularly difficult Friday, Damien came home later than usual. Roberts had made him help reorganize an entire section of the stock after a cataloging error. His back ached, he had a cut on his thumb, and his mood was terrible. He entered quietly, hoping everyone was already asleep. The house was dark, except for the small porch light. With no energy to climb the stairs, he sat on the back doorstep, looking out at the dark yard. The night was clear, with stars visible even with the city's light pollution. He took a deep breath, trying to let the day's tension dissipate. In the silence, he heard a faint creak of the floorboards. He turned and saw the twins in their pajamas, standing at the door. "Shouldn't you two be asleep?" he asked, unable to sound truly angry. "We heard you come in," Lucy explained. "Are you okay, Daddy?" Lily asked, her small voice full of concern. "Just tired," he answered honestly. To his surprise, the girls didn't go back to bed. Instead, they sat on the doorstep, one on each side of him. They didn't say anything, didn't ask for stories, didn't ask questions. They just sat there, sharing the silence of the night. Damien felt something strange in his chest, a tightness that wasn't unpleasant, but intense. He looked at the two dark heads, their serious little faces turned towards the stars, and realized that these children genuinely cared about him. Not about his money, not about his last name, not about what he could give them, just about him. After a few minutes, Eleanor appeared at the door. Damien expected a scolding for keeping the children awake, but she just smiled softly. "5 more minutes, girls," she said. "Then bed." When the twins finally got up, they each gave Damien a quick kiss on the cheek before running inside. He remained frozen, touching the spot on his face where he still felt the warmth of their small lips. "They like you," Eleanor commented, sitting where Lucy had been. Kids are like that, they see beyond appearances. I don't deserve this, Damien confessed, his voice low. It's not about deserving, she replied. It's just how the heart works. The days began to find their own rhythm. The work was still hard, but Damien no longer hated it completely. At home, he looked for ways to help, even if his attempt still resulted in occasional small disasters. On a rainy Saturday, the twins were restless, cooped up inside the house. Eleanor suggested they draw. She spread paper and colored pencils on the kitchen table and left them entertained while she prepared lunch. Damien watched from the living room, flipping through an old newspaper without really reading. The girls whispered to each other, laughing and trading colored pencils. Every now and then, they would look at him and go back to whispering. The following Tuesday, the weather turned sharply colder. Autumn was advancing, bringing biting winds and gray skies. Damien came home from work particularly exhausted. The delivery truck had been late, forcing everyone to stay later to unload it. When he opened the door, he felt the welcoming warmth of the house. The smell of home-cooked food filled the air, but what caught his attention were the twins, who, as soon as they saw him, ran in his direction, holding something in their hands. "Daddy, Daddy, we made a drawing for you," shouted Lily, almost tripping in her haste. "Look, it's us," added Lucy, holding out a colorful piece of paper. Damien knelt on the floor, too tired to bend over, and took the paper carefully. It was a simple drawing made with childish strokes and vibrant colors. 4 figures holding hands, a woman with long hair who could only be Eleanor, a tall man in what looked like a company uniform, and 2 small, identical girls, one on each side of the adults. "Look, this is Mommy," Lucy explained, pointing. "This is you in your work clothes," Lily continued. "And this is us," they said together, pointing to the smaller figures. "Are you made this for me?" Damien asked, his voice strangely choked up. "Yes," Lucy answered, excited. "Do you like it?" "It's for you to put up at work," Lily explained. "Our teacher at school said that dads like to take drawings to work." Damien looked at those childish strokes, at that representation that was so simple and yet so profound. A family. His family, at least in the eyes of these children. The twins moved closer, leaning their small shoulders against his, looking at the drawing with evident pride. Damien felt a wave of emotion he had never experienced before, a mix of gratitude, tenderness, and something more, something he couldn't name. "It's the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen," he said finally, and realized he was telling the truth. The girls' faces lit up with identical smiles. Damien felt his chest tighten again, but in a good way, as if something was growing inside him, something that didn't exist before. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Damien sat on the edge of the bed looking at the drawing. Carefully, almost reverently, he placed it on the bedside table, propped up against the simple lamp. He looked for a long time at those 4 figures holding hands. For the first time since all this madness began, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he could find his place in this small house, with this makeshift family. It wasn't the life he had planned. It wasn't what he had always wanted. But looking at that simple drawing, Damien realized it could be something far more valuable than anything he had ever owned. He fell asleep with that idea spinning in his mind, the drawing being the last thing he saw before closing his eyes. Autumn progressed, bringing with it shorter days and gray skies. That Thursday, heavy clouds gathered early, promising a storm. Damien noticed the signs as he left for work, but ignored them. He didn't have an umbrella and couldn't be late. The day in the stockroom went on as usual until mid-afternoon, when the rain finally came. Not as a light drizzle, but as a curtain of water that fell without warning. "Looks like it's going to last for hours," commented Roberts, looking out the small warehouse window. "Us you guys who came by bus are going to get wet today." Damien thought about calling Eleanor to ask her to bring an umbrella, but quickly dismissed the idea. Pride still spoke loudly, even after weeks in this new life. When his shift ended, the rain continued relentlessly. He waited for a few minutes at the building entrance, hoping it would let up. It didn't. Taking a deep breath, Damien turned up the collar of his thin jacket and plunged into the storm. In a few seconds, he was completely soaked. Cold water ran down his neck, seeped into his shoes and turned his clothes into heavy weights that clung to his body. The biting wind made everything worse. The bus was late. When it finally arrived, Damien was already shivering from the cold. The other passengers cast pitying glances at the drenched man leaving a puddle in the aisle. When he got off, he still had to walk 4 blocks in the relentless rain. His teeth chattered, and a strange fatigue was taking over his body. More than physical exhaustion, it was as if something was draining him from the inside. When he finally reached the front door of his house, his hands were shaking so much he could barely turn the key. He came in dripping, creating puddles on the wooden floor. "My God, you're soaked!" Eleanor exclaimed upon seeing him at the entrance. The twins came running but stopped at a safe distance, looking with wide eyes at the drenched man dripping at the entrance. "Daddy looks like a swimming pool," said Lucy, between laughter and concern. "Take off those wet clothes," ordered Eleanor, already going to get towels. "I'll prepare a hot bath." Damien obeyed without protest. The simple act of climbing the stairs seemed to require enormous effort. In the bathroom, he let the hot shower water thaw his muscles, but the shivering persisted. He put on the warmest pajamas he could find, a flannel set that had come in the suitcase prepared by his father. When he came downstairs, Eleanor had prepared a soup and insisted that he eat, even though he wasn't hungry. "You'll get sick if you don't take care of yourself," she said firmly. Damien tried to argue that he was fine, just tired, but his voice came out hoarse and his head was starting to throb. After dinner, the twins wanted to show him a new game they had learned at school. Damien tried to pay attention, but his eyes were heavy and an uncomfortable heat was spreading through his body. "I think I'll go to bed early," he announced, getting up with an effort. Eleanor touched his forehead with the back of her hand. "You're warm." "I think you have a fever." He tried to deny it, but a violent shiver contradicted him. He went up the stairs, leaning on the railing, feeling his legs weak. He collapsed onto the bed, feeling the world spin slightly. The night progressed, and with it came a real fever. Damien alternated between suffocating heat and cold shivers. His head throbbed, his throat burned, and a dry cough began to bother him. Semi-conscious, he noticed when Eleanor entered the room. He felt a cold compress on his forehead and heard the clinking of a cup being placed on the bedside table. "Drink this," she said, helping him sit up. "It's tea with honey and lemon. It will help your throat." Damien drank obediently, grateful for the hot liquid that momentarily soothed the burning sensation. "Thank you," he murmured, surprised at how such a simple word could be so difficult to pronounce at that moment. Eleanor just nodded, replacing the compress with a new one. Her movements were efficient, yet gentle. Hands that knew how to care, that had faced nights like this before. At some point, he heard small voices at the door. "Can we come in, Mummy?" "Just a minute," Eleanor replied. "Daddy is sick and needs to rest. We brought something to make him feel better." The door opened wider, and the twins entered carrying something between them, a wool blanket, slightly frayed at the edges, but clearly the best the house owned. "It's our special blanket," explained Lily, as the two of them spread it over Damien. "We use it when it's very cold." "It will make you better, Daddy," Lucy assured him, with the unwavering certainty that only children possess. Damien wanted to say something, to thank them, but the fever clouded his thoughts. He managed only a weak smile as the girls carefully arranged the blanket around him with solemn care. "Now you two need to sleep," said Eleanor, leading them out. "Tomorrow you can see how Daddy is doing." The night progressed in lapses of consciousness. Damien felt when Eleanor changed the compresses, when she helped him drink more tea, when she checked his temperature. Between moments and he would sink into a restless sleep, filled with feverish dreams. In one of these lucid moments, in what seemed to be the middle of the night, he opened his eyes and was surprised by what he saw. Eleanor was sitting in a chair beside the bed, asleep in an uncomfortable position. A thin blanket covered her shoulders. In her hand, she still held a damp cloth. More surprising, however, was seeing the twins. The two were sleeping on the floor, on a makeshift pallet, curled up together like puppies. They had come back, probably after Eleanor had fallen asleep, just to be near him. Something warm and unexpected spread through Damien's chest, and it wasn't the fever. It was a new sensation, a lump in his throat that had nothing to do with the illness. These people, this woman and these children, were taking care of him. Not because he could offer something in return, not because his last name opened doors, not because his money bought favors. They were there simply because they cared. The realization hit him hard. In his entire privileged life, surrounded by luxury and self-serving people, he had never experienced anything like this genuine care, this selfless love. He felt a tear run down his feverish face. He closed his eyes, letting that new sensation lull him back to sleep. The next morning, the fever had subsided a bit. Damien still felt weak, but the worst was over. When he opened his eyes, the room was empty. Eleanor and the girls had already left. With an effort, he got up and went downstairs. He found the family in the kitchen, having breakfast. The girls ran to him as soon as they saw him. "Daddy's better," shouted Lucy, hugging his legs. "Our special blanket worked," added Lily, proudly. "Now you should be in bed," Eleanor chided, but without severity. "I'm better," he replied, his voice still hoarse. "And hungry." She smiled, pulling out a chair. "That's a good sign." The girls went to school, accompanied by a neighbor who also took her children. Eleanor called Roberts, explaining that Damien was sick and wouldn't be coming to work. To his surprise, the supervisor was understanding. "Tell him to get well properly," he heard Eleanor repeat Roberts' words. "We need him in shape on Monday." The day passed slowly. Damien alternated between periods in bed and moments in the living room, wrapped in the girls' blanket. Eleanor worked from home, sewing pieces for a local shop, a job he didn't even know she had. At night, when the twins were already asleep, Damien couldn't fall asleep. The illness had altered his rhythm, and now he felt restless. He went down to the kitchen for a glass of water and found Eleanor sitting at the table, a cup of tea in her hands. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. He nodded, sitting across from her. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, only the ticking of the wall clock filling the room. "Thank you," Damien finally said, "for taking care of me yesterday." Eleanor shrugged. "Anyone would do the same." "No, they wouldn't," he replied, and with certainty in his voice. "No one has ever taken care of me like that." She watched him over the rim of her cup, her green eyes attentive. "The girls were really worried about you," she commented. Damien looked at his own hands, searching for the right words. "I don't know how to be a father," he finally admitted, his voice low, almost a whisper. I don't know why they call me that." Eleanor placed her cup on the table, watching the dark liquid for a moment before answering. "Because they already consider you their father." The simplicity of the answer surprised him. Damien looked up, meeting Eleanor's serene gaze. "But they barely know me. And I've never been good with kids. I never thought about having a family." "Kids don't care about that," she replied. "They see what we try to hide. They notice when someone cares, even if they try not to show it." Damien remained silent, absorbing her words. "You've never talked about your story," he finally said. "Why were you living on the streets?" "And their father," Eleanor sighed, running her fingers along the rim of the cup. "I've always been poor," she began, her voice calm. "I grew up in a simple neighborhood, the daughter of a single mother. I met Thomas when I was working as a waitress. He was charming, well-spoken, promised the world." She paused, as if organizing her memories. "I got pregnant. He seemed happy, said we would be together. We got a small apartment. The girls were born. For a while, it was good." Her gaze drifted to some distant point. "Then I discovered the debts. Thomas gambled, betting everything we had. One day, I came home from work and he was gone. He took what little money we had saved, leaving only a note and a lot of debt." Damien listened in silence, seeing this strong woman in a new light. "I tried to keep things going, but it was hard with 2 babies. I lost my job because I missed too much work to take care of them when they got sick. With no references, I couldn't find another job. The bills piled up. The rent was late." Eleanor took a sip of tea before continuing. "The eviction came when the girls were still babies, not even a year old. We stayed in shelters for a while, then with acquaintances. but no one wants a woman with 2 small children for very long. We ended up on the street. The simplicity with which she told such a harsh story impressed Damien. There was no drama in her voice, only the acceptance of someone who had faced the worst and survived. "How did you survive?" he asked, his voice choked. "Day by day," she replied. "I worked odd jobs when I could. Some people helped. Churches sometimes offered shelter. I learned to protect the girls from the cold, to find safe places to sleep. I learned to never give up." Damien felt a lump in his throat. He compared his life of privilege with this woman's daily struggle to keep her daughters alive and safe. He felt ashamed of all the times he had complained about minor inconveniences, of all the things he had wasted. "You're amazing," he said finally, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Eleanor smiled slightly, without vanity. "I'm just a mother. I do what needs to be done." That night, when he finally returned to bed, Damien lay awake for a long time, thinking about everything he had heard. Eleanor's words echoed in his mind, along with the image of the girls sleeping on the floor just to be near him. Something was changing inside him, slowly but irreversibly. Like ice melting after a long winter, his heart was beginning to soften. After 3 days at home, the fever finally passed. On Monday, Damien returned to work in the stockroom. Roberts greeted him with a nod. "You look better," the supervisor commented. "Can you work today?" "Yes, I'm fine," Damien replied, surprised by his own willingness. The day went on as usual. Damien organized shelves, checked deliveries, and helped unload a truck. His hands, once smooth and soft, now had calluses in the right places. His body had adapted to physical labor. During lunch, he sat with some colleagues who were talking about their children. One of them was showing pictures of a birthday party. Another was complaining about the price of toys. "My daughters." "Birthday is next month," said a man named Garcia. "They've been asking for presents for weeks." "That's kids for you," laughed another. "Mine are thrilled with any little thing I bring home." Damien ate in silence, but the words stuck in his mind. When his shift ended, instead of heading straight for the bus stop, he walked a few blocks to a small toy store he had noticed days earlier. The store was simple, nothing compared to the luxury boutiques where he used to buy gifts. A small bell rang as he entered. Colorful shelves displayed toys of different sizes and prices. He walked through the aisles, feeling out of place. He didn't know what 4-year-old girls liked. He stopped in front of a section of dolls. Some were expensive, with elaborate clothes and accessories. Others were simpler, but with kind faces and painted smiles. He chose 2 identical dolls, but with dresses of different colors, one blue and one pink. They weren't sophisticated, but they seemed well made and had friendly expressions. At the checkout, he checked the price and mentally calculated how much would be left of his weekly salary. It would be tight, but he could pay the bills. "Are these for your daughters?" the saleswoman asked as she wrapped the dolls in colorful paper. "Yes," Damien replied, surprised by the naturalness of his answer. The way home seemed shorter than usual. He held the package carefully, feeling a strange anxiety. He had never given gifts like this, for no special occasion, just because he wanted to see someone happy. When he opened the door, the twins ran to greet him, as they did every day. Their curious gazes immediately fell on the colorful package. "What's that, Daddy?" Lucy asked, pointing. "It's for you," he replied, holding out the gift. The girls took the package with wide-eyed expectation. They tore the paper together, letting out squeals of joy when they discovered the dolls. "Look, Mommy," shouted Lily, showing the blue-dressed doll to Eleanor, who was watching from the kitchen. "They're beautiful," exclaimed Lucy. Before Damien could react, the 2 of them jumped towards him, wrapping their arms tightly around his neck. "Thank you, Daddy," they said in unison, planting kisses on his cheeks. Something broke inside Damien at that moment. Not painfully, but as if an invisible wall had crumbled. The word "Daddy," which once sounded strange and uncomfortable, now warmed his chest. For the first time, he liked hearing it, liked what it meant. He hugged the girls back, feeling their small bodies vibrating with joy over such a simple gift. He looked up and met Eleanor's gaze, who was smiling discreetly. In that moment, Damien Cole's pride finally gave way. It had been almost 2 months since Damien started working in the stockroom. Winter was ending, bringing longer days and a shy sun that was beginning to warm the city. On a seemingly ordinary Wednesday, Roberts approached as Damien was organizing a shipment of supplies. "Cole, I have a message for you," the supervisor said, holding out a small folded piece of paper. "The president wants to see you in his office. Today at 2. Damien felt a pit in his stomach. Since the beginning of this experiment, as he mentally called his new life, Martin had kept his distance. He watched from afar, without interfering, without commenting. What could he want now? "Is there a problem?" he asked Roberts. The man shrugged. "He doesn't tell me what goes on in that head of his. But you've been doing a good job here, better than many who were born carrying boxes." Coming from Roberts, that was practically a declaration of love. Damien nodded, trying not to show his anxiety. The rest of the morning dragged on. At lunch, he ate mechanically, thinking about the possibilities. Had his father finally tired of the experiment? Was he ready to give him back his old life? And more importantly, did he still want that life back? At 2 o'clock sharp, after washing his face and trying to tidy up his uniform as best he could, Damien knocked on the imposing door of the presidential office. "Come in," came the familiar voice. Martin Cole was standing by the huge panoramic window, observing the city 30 floors below. He didn't turn around immediately when Damien entered. "Sit down," he indicated, still with his back to him. Damien obeyed, noticing how the leather armchair, which once seemed so common to him, was now an almost strange luxury after months of plastic chairs and hard benches. Martin finally turned around. His attentive eyes scanned his son from head to toe, noticing every detail: the simple but clean uniform, the now calloused hands, the less arrogant posture, the more direct gaze. "How long has it been?" Martin asked. 53 days, Damien replied, without needing to think. He had counted every one of them. Martin nodded, returning to his chair behind the imposing desk. For a long moment, he just watched his son in silence, as if searching for something in his face. "Roberts gives me weekly reports on you," he said finally. "He says you're punctual, that you don't complain about the hard work, that you learn quickly. He also says the other employees like you, that you eat with them in the cafeteria, that you talk normally, without airs of superiority." Damien didn't know what to reply. It felt strange to be praised for such basic things, treating people like people. "So?" he asked, when the silence stretched on. Martin leaned forward slightly. "I had cameras installed in the house." The revelation hit Damien like a punch. "Are you spied on us?" he asked, feeling a mixture of indignation and shame. "I needed to know if you were just faking it, if you were only treating the girls and Eleanor well when you thought someone might be watching." Damien felt his face grow hot. The idea that private moments, the disastrous attempts at cooking, the playtime with the twins, the late-night conversations with Eleanor, had been observed bothered him deeply. "And what did you discover?" he asked, trying to control his irritation. "That you weren't faking it," Martin replied, and there was something different in his voice, a tone Damien didn't recognize. "I saw you trying to fix the faucet on a Sunday. I saw you playing with the girls on the living room floor. I saw you burn dinner and then clean it all up without complaining." Martin paused, as if organizing his thoughts. "I thought you wouldn't last," he continued, his voice softer. "I thought in a week or two you'd be begging to go back to your old life. But I was wrong." He took a significant pause. "I'm proud." The words hung heavily between them. In his entire life, Damien couldn't remember hearing that phrase from his father. Martin Cole was not a man for compliments or displays of affection. "You've changed," Martin went on. "I'd not just on the outside, but on the inside." Damien held his father's gaze, not looking away as he used to. There was a strange calm inside him, the calm of someone who had finally found his place. "I want to offer you a better position and a more dignified salary," Martin said. "You've earned it through your effort." "What position?" Damien asked cautiously. "Assistant manager of the logistics department. It's not an executive position, not yet, but it's a job with real responsibility where your business skills will be useful." Damien considered the offer. A few weeks ago, he would have been insulted by the proposal of a mid-level position. Now, he understood the value of honest work, regardless of the title. You'll spend 2 weeks learning the ropes of the department with Patterson, then you'll take over. The salary is good, not what you had before, but enough to live comfortably. I appreciate it, Damien replied after a moment of reflection. I'll do my best. I know you will, Martin said, and this time a discreet smile appeared on his face. He extended his hand across the desk. As they shook hands, Damien felt as if something had been completed between them. For years, he had tried to impress his father with extravagance, parties, and showing off. In the end, what had earned his respect was precisely giving all of that up. The following weeks were a period of adjustment. Damien learned the functions of the new position, absorbing every detail Patterson taught him. The work was complex and required planning, long-term vision, and people skills, things he discovered he had when he truly applied himself. His first official day as assistant manager coincided with his first paycheck in the new role. Seeing the payslip, Damien felt a mix of emotions. It was far less than he used to spend on a single night out, but it was his, earned with honest work, sweat, and dedication. That evening, he returned home later than usual. He found Eleanor in the kitchen, preparing dinner while the twins colored at the table. "Daddy!" the two shouted when they saw him, running to hug him. Damien knelt to receive them, feeling that wave of affection that still surprised him. After the hugs and kisses, he gave them small chocolates he had bought on the way, a ritual they had established for days when he arrived late. "How was the first day?" Eleanor asked, as she served the soup she had prepared. "Different," he replied, thoughtfully. "It's strange giving orders after so long taking them. You'll get used to it," she smiled. "You have a natural way with leadership." The compliment caught him by surprise. Eleanor was not one for gratuitous comments. "I brought something for you too," he said, handing her a small package. Eleanor opened it with curiosity. It was a delicate silver necklace with a simple heart-shaped pendant. "It's beautiful," she murmured, touching the pendant with her fingertips. "But you didn't have to." "I wanted to thank you," Damien interrupted, "for everything, for being patient with me, for teaching me, for—" He gestured, encompassing the house, the girls, the life they had built together. Eleanor smiled, and there was a different light in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply, putting on the necklace. That night, for the first time, they slept in the same room, he in the bed, she on a mattress on the floor, but the symbolic step had been taken. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was respect, partnership, and maybe the beginning of something deeper. The months passed, bringing subtle but significant changes. The better salary allowed for small improvements to the house, new curtains, a more modern television, educational toys for the girls. Damien learned to manage money carefully, valuing every cent in a way he never had before. At home, each day brought new lessons. Eleanor taught him to cook simple dishes. After a few catastrophic attempts, including a small fire in a frying pan that became a family joke, he managed to prepare decent meals. He also learned small household repairs. Mr. Thompson, a retired neighbor, showed him how to change faucets, fix hinges, and repair minor leaks. The first time he fixed the pipe under the sink by himself, he felt a pride he had never experienced when closing million-dollar deals. The twins were growing, fascinating in their development. Damien followed every small progress, new drawings, words learned, skills acquired. He knew that Lucy was afraid of thunder and calmed down when he told her stories about magic bears. He knew that Lily loved to sing and dreamed of having a piano like the one at school. His relationship with Eleanor evolved slowly. It was not a conventional romance. They had started at the end, with an arranged marriage and daughters that were not biologically his, but day by day they built something genuine. They talked about work during dinner, discussed the small decisions of the day, and planned for the future with cautious hope. On an especially quiet Friday, after a simple but tasty dinner, the girls asked Damien to read them a story. It was a ritual they had established on Fridays. He would read an extra chapter before bed. "Which book today?" he asked, sitting on the worn living room rug. "This one," exclaimed Lucy, bringing a colorful book about a family of bears, their favorite. Damien smiled, getting more comfortable. The twins sat next to him, one on each side, resting their heads on his arms. Eleanor watched from the armchair, knitting a scarf for the coming winter. He opened the book and began to read, giving different voices to each character. He knew the story by heart. They had read it countless times, but he feigned surprise at the right moments, just to see the girls' eyes widen with excitement. When he finished, he closed the book slowly. The twins were relaxed against him, their eyes heavy with sleep, but with that satisfied glow of children who have received exactly what they wanted. "Time for bed," Eleanor announced, putting away her knitting. "Just 5 more minutes, Mommy," pleaded Lily, snuggling closer to Damien. He put his arms around both of them, feeling their small hearts beating against his chest. A wave of emotion washed over him, so intense it almost hurt. These children, whom he had been calling his daughters for months, had truly become his daughters. This simple house had truly become his home. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words slipping out before he could think. His voice came out hoarse, laden with contained emotion. The twins lifted their faces, looking at him with those identical green eyes, inherited from their mother. They smiled at the same time, as only twins can. "We love you too, Daddy," they replied in unison, as they did when something was very important. Damien felt tears in his eyes. He who hadn't cried since childhood, he didn't try to hide them. He hugged the girls tighter, feeling a happiness he had never imagined possible. In that instant, he understood that he had never been so happy. Autumn brought golden leaves and shorter afternoons. On a particularly pleasant Sunday, Damien was enjoying the day with his family. In the morning, they had gone to the small neighborhood park, where the twins played on the swings, while he and Eleanor talked about plans for the upcoming holiday. After lunch, Damien was in the backyard, trying to fix the makeshift swing he had made for the girls, when he heard the doorbell. He put down his tools and went to answer, wiping his hands on his jeans. When he opened the door, he was surprised to see Martin standing on the porch. His father rarely visited him. Their interactions were almost exclusively limited to the company. "Dad?" he asked, confused. Martin seemed slightly uncomfortable, a rarity for a man who was usually so confident. "May I come in?" Damien made room, intrigued. Martin entered, looking around with interest. The house was different from when he had last seen it. New curtains, freshly painted walls, toys organized on a shelf Damien had built, framed photos of the twins on the wall. "It's different," Martin commented, "more welcoming." "We've made some improvements," Damien replied. "We painted the walls. I fixed the hallway floor. Eleanor made the curtains." The sound of childish laughter came from the kitchen, where Eleanor and the twins were making cookies. The girls, hearing the unfamiliar voice, came curiously into the living room. They stopped at the entrance, observing the visitor with the disarming frankness of children. "Show your grandpa," said Lucy. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Martin seemed momentarily speechless, surprised by the title. Yes, I am. Daddy talks about you," Lily informed him, approaching without shyness. "He said you have a very tall office, where you can see the whole city." Martin looked at Damien, one eyebrow raised in a silent question. "They're curious," Damien explained with a shy smile. "They want to know where I come from, what my life was like before." Eleanor appeared at the kitchen door, her hands covered in flour. "Mr. Cole," she greeted with a polite nod. What a surprise. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Martin replied, with a formality that seemed out of place in the homey environment. "We're making cookies," Lucy explained. "Do you want to try some later?" "I would like that very much," he replied, with a gentleness that surprised Damien. As Eleanor returned to the kitchen to make coffee, Martin took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it to Damien. "This is why I came," he said. "Are you ready for the next step?" Damien took the envelope cautiously. Inside, he found a key and property documents. His name and Eleanor's were listed as the owners of a house at 28 Magnolia Street. "What is this?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "A house," Martin replied simply. 3 bedrooms, a backyard, near a good school. Nothing extravagant but comfortable. But we don't need— You earned this with your hard work and courage, Martin interrupted. Now it's time to start a new chapter. Eleanor returned with the coffee, immediately sensing the tension in the air. Did something happen? She asked, placing the tray on the table. Damien handed her the documents in silence. She examined them carefully, her eyes gradually widening. Is this a house? She asked, looking at Martin. For you, he confirmed. Modest, but clean, comfortable, and dignified. The fruit of Damien's effort. The twins, sensing the importance of the moment, approached silently, cookies half forgotten in their small hands. Are we moving, Mommy? Lucy asked. To a new house, Lily added. Eleanor looked at Damien, who was still holding the key as if it were something precious and fragile. Yes, he finally replied. We're moving. The girls burst into shouts of joy, jumping and clapping their hands. They ran to Martin and, to everyone's shock, hugged his legs. Thank you, Grandpa, they exclaimed together. Martin, the impassive Martin Cole, smiled. A genuine smile that lit up his usually stern face. He placed his hands on the girls' heads, visibly moved. You're welcome, little ones, he replied, his voice softer than Damien had ever heard. The move happened 3 weeks later. The new house was in a quiet neighborhood, with tree-lined sidewalks and a small park 2 blocks away. It was exactly as Martin had described, modest but well-built and welcoming. Each child had her own room, a luxury that made them radiant. The kitchen was spacious, with enough cabinets for everything. The backyard, though not large, had space for a real swing set and flower beds for the flowers Eleanor had always wanted to plant. On moving day, Damien made a point of personally carrying the most important boxes, the girls' toys, Eleanor's knitting, the tools he had learned to use, the framed drawing the twins had made of the family. When the last piece of furniture was in place, Eleanor prepared a simple snack, which they ate sitting on the living room floor, the table not yet assembled. The twins ran from room to room, exploring every corner, planning where they would put their treasures. At night, with the girls finally asleep in their new rooms, Damien and Eleanor sat on the front porch. The neighborhood was quiet, with only the occasional bark of a dog or the distant sound of a car breaking the tranquility. It's strange, Eleanor commented, her voice soft in the darkness. I never imagined we would have this. Me neither, Damien admitted. When my father forced me to marry you, I thought it was the end of my life. She laughed softly. And I thought it would just be a temporary solution. A roof, food on the table, safety for the girls. And now, Eleanor turned to him, her face visible only by the soft glow of the porch light. Now I think it was the beginning of something, not the end. Damien reached out his hand, touching hers on the arm of the chair. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had been doing it for years. Through the window they could see the girls' rooms, the nightlights they had installed projecting stars.